Okay, but before I go further with that, I want to soften this up just a bit. And there are some rocks and other things I want to put into the water. But first I'm going to finish up this reflection. Now I've lost some of my darkest darks, so I'm going to go back in and find them. They're there somewhere. Tend to go a little back and forth, back and forth. There's some little rocks in the water here. So I'm gonna put those in, get some interesting details. And I'm going to adjust the shoreline. So that it looks more like the real thing. Also a nice big rock right here. You can start putting in those details. And another little rock there in the distance. Behind it. Starts looking like there's water lapping up onto the shore over here. There's several more rocks in the water here. And not all the rocks are exactly the same color, so we can go in with all of our other little bits of purples and whatever colors we see and give them a little more depth. There is a large rock here with a bunch of grass here. And again, we'll start with our dark blackish color here. And if I look, you can see that is put in some of the darks that I lost. There's also some leaves in here from trees that are closer up, so we'll also be putting those in pretty soon. These rocks in front aren't just solid black, so I'm going to add the highlights to them. And I don't think I have exactly that color, so I'm going to mix a new color for that. I'm going to start with this purple color, which is, our alizarin crimson white and one ultramarine blue and a little bit of yellow ochre. That's how we got that color. But this color is a little warmer than that, so I'm just going to add a little more of the yellow ochre to it. Maybe a little bit of white, because that's a little darker than I want. And it looks a little light, but the paint is wet, so I can mix it into, the paint if it's not dark enough. And just give it a little bit more substance and depth to it. Well, I think that is plenty, just the right color for that. It's kind of in shadow, so it's not getting a really bright highlight like some of these rocks up here. But you want to see the shape of the rock a little, and the fact that it is a rock and not just a black blob. I add a little bit of that warm brown again in our shadow areas, and so it's not just black and not just solid, not just one or two colors. I love to have 3 or 4 colors everywhere. I notice my photos is splatter all over it. We can continue with the details of the rocks up here. I notice there's kind of a little bit of a blue tinge in here, so I'm going to also add that kind of bluish color. And now we have to just go in and soften those up a bit. I still am working on this reflection. I'm not 100% happy with the water, the way it's moving, but slowly getting closer and moving up on it. Now that I have those rocks, I can kind of work around those rocks and make it look like the water is, beating against them or flowing around them, or whatever water does around whatever the water just moves and flows around whatever it meets. It's very flexible. I still feel like I can add even whiter highlights, so I might just I don't like to use pure white most of the time, but every now and then you do need just to add a touch to give that extra punch. So this is like pure white, and these last few strokes, which are very thick, I'm going to try to keep them nice and thick because that will draw some attention to them. There's a little trick to water. I said I don't have that very good technique for water, as in there's no generic way of doing it, but there is a little thing that I do sometimes, and it's kind of a wiggle. It's kind of like an S, a really quick S, kind of a back and forth Z. And anything that I don't like about it, I can soften up and get rid of. Let's see if I can water wiggle up here. I can only do this with the liner. I've not been able to figure out another way of doing the water wiggle. I'm going to switch to a slightly darker value and do that same thing up here, the little bit of water wiggle. Because I see it. It's kind of use it when you need a reflection. Back and forth, back and forth. And I completely got rid of all my darks. So I'm going to go back in and bring some of those darks back again, back and forth. There's a really nice color in this photograph, right in here, that picks up the color of the sky. And I think I am going to mix that color right now. It's a little more brilliant than any of the blues we've done so far. And I am going to use the ultramarine blue. And I actually like to add a little tiny bit of Prussian blue to it. And it gives it a little, I don't like a simple color. I want to make it more complex. But I think that's close to what I need. And I might even make a little bit darker value as well. That's really dark. I mean, I want it dark, but I don't want it to be too brilliant. So this is the ultramarine blue and the Prussian blue mixed together. And that may be too bright, but I'm going to work with it on the canvas. So it's going to start getting more blue as it gets closer to this edge. So when you're doing water and rocks around it, you're kind of at risk of losing some of it while you're doing the other. But don't worry, you'll find it again. Just be patient and don't rush it. And just keep doing what you need to do until it gets to the point where you're very happy with it. That color being only in that one spot makes me want to put it in a few other spots. So I'm just going to a little bit back here and here and there. Might help balance that painting out again. So back and forth, like I said. And some of that light into that blue. We earlier made this color for the greens back here, and so I still have some of that color. And I'm going to use that for some little bit of green back here in the shadow area. It's kind of a blue-green color. And okay to make it go on past the rocks. And then I want to add a little more of the Kelly or the warm greens, just to give it a little more texture and flavor and interest. Let's put that tree branch in. Now this is kind of dangerous because I don't want to cover up everything I did back here, but I do want to enhance it. And that tree branch is kind of that same dark color that we've been using all along for our rocks and other dark areas, so I can still use that color for that tree branch. And I'm going to start it out looking carefully, figuring out where it's going to go. Now sometimes, let me show you, before I go into that really dark color, sometimes it's easier for you to start with a lighter color, a lighter value, and then go on top of it, because this kind of thing is a little scary for my students to go right in there with a big dark black line. And so if you do it with the light color first, then you establish where you want that dark color to go, and it's easier to erase a light color. Well, it's much easier now that everything's dry back there, but if this was wet, it would be even scarier. So I'm going to go ahead and use this kind of purplish color to start my tree, and then I will put it in darker. And a tree has kind of a little wiggly branch feel to it. And I've done enough branches where I pretty much know how to do a tree branch, but I want to get an idea where I'm going. I want to go up right up to this point with a long straight line. Then this other one, not only am I looking at the shape of the branch, I'm looking at the negative space between the branches, so I can judge. For instance, there's a little space like that. This up here kind of goes down. So this helps me define where this branch is going to go, and if I like it like that. And then I don't have to commit. Another way of getting skinnier lines, if you don't do it the first time, you can take a clean wet brush. So this is only good if the painting underneath is dry, and you just kind of lift up the paint around it until you have a thinner line. So now I kind of have an idea where I want my branches, most of them. There's a few I didn't do that I will do anyway. Then I can go in with my black and be more confident. Sometimes it's easier to draw a line on top of a line than it is to draw the first line. Maybe other people don't have it as easy as I do, but I found it just easier the second time. So it's nice a way for me to plan where everything's going to be by doing it in a color that's easier to erase. It also gives that branch just a little bit more depth by having another color underneath it. Alright, I want one branch going down like that. And it's okay if I've smeared a little bit in the branches area, because it'll just look like the very smallest, lots of tiny little branches that just make up more of a gray than an exact color, an exact line. And I like having tree branches or trees with nice branches and trunks. It just gives the painting some interesting textures and shapes. Also, don't be afraid of going off the edge. This is already close to the edge, but I've seen a lot of trees that just go up to the edge and then don't cross over. And the edge of your painting is not the edge of the world. It is just a window into the world. So there's lots of stuff going on beyond that edge. So don't try to confine all of your painting inside this little box. Now there's some interesting leaves going on over here. And I'm going to add those. But first, I want to put in a couple of branches that are kind of swooping in from up here where we can't see. Okay, now on this photo, those leaves are very green. On this photo, the leaves are very yellow. I think I was running out of ink. So it really doesn't matter. I can make it whatever color I want, and I kind of like the yellow ones. They have a little bit more feelings to them. So I'm going to make that color. I'm looking at this yellowish color, and I'm going to start with my cadmium yellow medium, and I'm going to mix it with a little bit of yellow ochre. And see, oops, I got some purple in there. That's okay. Doesn't bother me. Now it may be a little brighter than I see, but I kind of like that color. It goes well with the painting. And the other colors that are up there are more on the green side. I'm going to make this green using a little bit of that color I just mixed and just adding a little bit more Prussian blue to it. I don't need much. And that'll make a dark green, but in the same family. Since I use that, they're going to go with each other. These leaves back here are different than the leaves in the distance, because back, we can't see individual leaves, we just see clumps of leaves. And these are individual leaves, almost, I want to say like a maple. It might be a maple or some other kind of tree with maple-like leaves. And I'm going to start with my yellow color that I just mixed, that yellow ochre and the cadmium yellow mix. And I'm going to make some individual leaves up here and kind of a look at the general pattern of these leaves. I don't need to make each leaf exactly like what I see. Just give the impression of tiny little points. A lot of these leaves overlap each other, so you're probably not going to find, the perfect silhouette of the perfect leaf here. Just give an impression of these leaves. And in the photo they don't really show you any of these leaves over here, but I kind of want to put some more of those leaves out here. And I'm getting more dots than I am spiky, so I'm gotta be more careful with that. They're almost like little star shapes. And try not to make any of them exactly the same as each other. Seems like there's some distant leaves or things back there, and I can take my stencil brush and put in some of those back here. And I'm going to add a little bit of that gold there as well. And don't worry if I lose my branches. I'll bring them back. Add just a little bit of white to that same gold color and make a couple of spots a little lighter than we're seeing, and so it looks like there's light coming through the leaves. And then the last thing I'm going to do on these leaves is that green that I added a little bit of Prussian blue to this gold and made this green. There's some water in my paint. I don't like that. Okay. So some of this green color goes in where you see these leaves. And if I want it to be really fancy, in fact I think I will be, I'm going to add another color. I'm going to add a little bit of that warm brown that I used before. It's kind of almost on the red side. In fact, I think I'm going to add a little bit more cadmium red to that, so it actually will be on the red side. Come on, you can do it. That red adds that little bit of sparkle and interest to those leaves. I'll even put a little bit out here. Be careful when you're washing your brush. Sometimes you get a little bit of water on your brush and it's not good. So you just take a dry brush and kind of sop it up. There we go. I think anytime I do green, I like to add yellows and golds to it. I just think they have that much more feeling to it. That complementary color adds a lot. So you see I'm not doing individual leaves, but it just gives a texture like there are leaves going on. And I keep getting bigger and bigger. And take over this whole background with leaves if I'm not careful. I've lost some of that darkness in the background, and I'm going to bring that back. That's better. I'm also going to find some of those branches again. We're getting closer. Okay, so the last thing I want to do are the grasses on the rocks. There's some grasses right up here and here, especially here and in the foreground here. And when we're done with that, I think it'll be finished. So this is the green I just made that was in the trees. But that's not bad. But I'm going to make several greens. We've got, some of the greens that we used earlier. We can use some of those. But I'm also going to make a green that's going to be the very dark green. We kind of had this green that we made for some of the distant hills, but it's too blue. So how to make a dark green? Start with yellow and add an ultramarine blue to it. And you have a nice dark green. Is it dark enough? No. This is a very bright Kelly green compared to what I need. So I'm going to grab a little more ultramarine blue, and I'm going to add a little Prussian blue. And to make it even darker but not so brilliant, I'm going to add a little bit of red to it, some of the alizarin crimson. That's a lot of red. So this is going to make an almost blackish green. And that's kind of what I need up here, is a very dark green here for the shadow greens. So I think combination of all those greens that I have here will help me build all these grasses. So to start off my grass, I'm going to start with the base. Somewhere in here, the base of this grass. And I can start doing a few blades. And I want these blades to go up and go overlap this edge here where our rocks are touching. Now I'm going to add a little bit of medium to this so it can flow better. I don't need to make this all dark. I'm just going to do a couple, an idea of where those grasses are, and then, because these are the lighter grasses, I'm going to have my lighter colors in there. But these are the shadows of the grasses underneath. So each one of these is going to be a slightly different clumps. So right now I'm just establishing where my little clumps of grass are, and I like to have lots of different sizes and varieties. I don't want to make these just exactly the same. I want them to all be a little different. But all of these are going to be much lighter when I'm done. This is just the first step. Over here though, these are going to stay really dark, so I want them to be very neat and clean. And with grass, these clumps look like the ones in the middle are going up, and I want to do these just right, because this wet paint, sometimes it's easier to, sometimes you get a better point if you start at the bottom and then go up, but it's not easier than the other. So you got to experiment, see which one works the best for you. I tend to be able to start at the tip and go down, but it may be harder for someone who doesn't have the experience that I do to make a perfect point to start off with. Quite often the beginner will do a big heavy point like that, and I did that on purpose to show you. So now I'm going to turn this heavy point into a couple of skinny points. And so the ones in the top go almost straight up, and as they turn around they start to curve in the other, on the left hand side they curve towards the left, and on the right hand side they start curving towards the right. And I will add some of the lighter greens to this, but it's going to be mostly this very dark green. And don't be afraid to let these crisscross. They're not all parallel. Some of them are going to cross in front of the others. That clump can be a little taller maybe. I don't know. Now these little grasses have like little seed pods on them, on the tips. So you might get some interesting details and don't worry if each of these little seed pods aren't connected to a blade of grass. They can let the viewer fill in the blanks. They will know they're attached. They're just so thin you can't see them. I wanted to show you what I like to do with my liner in what I call sharpening. So I can grab the paint that I'm going to use for the grass, and then I'm going to pull and twist and that way I get a nice sharp point to my liner. If I just went in and started painting by just dipping and painting, I would not have the point. But if I pull and twist, it brings it to a very sharp point, and then I can get those very tiny leaves on my grass. On with the grass. So I'm gonna now add some of the lighter values of the grass, using some of our lighter greens that we made. And again, I'm sharpening it up, and I just kind of go over what I did before, only this time I leave the darkest shadows underneath the grasses. And I don't like to do just one color of green on anything, so there's actually going to be several colors. Let's try this green. This is a slightly more brighter green, a Kelly green. So I have a combination of greens. I need it to be really sharp, so I'm going to add a little bit of medium to it and then sharpen it up. And hopefully adding the medium will help it flow a little easier. If the paint is too thick, it just won't cooperate sometimes. And once again, there's little like seed pods that give it some texture. I will continue on to the rest of them. I'm also going to add some golds and reds to these. I like give it a variety of colors. At the very bottom of these, I wanted to soften them up. I didn't want them. I want them to look like they're growing out of the ground and not just floating on it. And some of the plants could be other types of foliage. They don't all have to be grasses. You can even add wildflowers if you want to get all fancy. It's your painting. You can do with it what you wish. And this particular painting doesn't have a very strong light source. There's not a strong directional light. I can't see any long shadows or anything, so I'm not really sure where the light is coming from and what direction. So I don't have to be too careful about where my shadows are, but you do want to keep that in mind when you're doing landscapes, that your light source is coming from the same direction throughout the painting. Don't need a whole lot over here. And before I'm done, I want to add those golds and reds that I was talking about. I can still use some of the same colors I used up here in the trees. Oh, and I wanted to show another technique that not too many people think about. Sometimes these little tiny lines are just very hard to get. So now I'm going to show you a little bit of a technique that I use to get very fine lines. And you won't see too many oil painters using this tool, although you might, but this particular tool I just happened to have lying around and I started using it, and it works really nicely. And it is a pen, a dip pen, a very fine pointed dip pen, and I use it to scratch. And I'll show you how I use it now. It works best when you have had a dry layer underneath, because if you scratch away and bring back raw canvas, it doesn't always look good. But basically, I will scratch through the wet wet paint and get these fine lines. Now, I'll go ahead and do a couple over here. This is great for these grasses. It also could work for branches and other little details like that. I've used it for lines on a barbed wire fence. I've used it for a line on a fishing line. So I'm just now looking at little areas that I think I can punch up with some contrast or whatever details I see. But I'm so close to being finished with this. So can I call this done? I can easily play with this for hours and hours, but it gets to the point where you say, am I getting it any better, or am I making it worse? So if I can't make it better, I might as well call it done.